What if I told you 9 experienced hikers fled their tent into freezing darkness on February 1st, 1959, and for 65 years, nobody knows what terrified them so badly they cut through their own tent from the inside?
February 1st, 1959. Kholat Shackle-Dead Mountain in the northern Ural Mountains of Soviet Russia. Igor Dyatlov, he's 23, leading 8 others. And the temperatures, they plummeted to negative 40 degrees Celsius.
Negative 40. I can't even fathom that.
And not just cold, hurricane-force winds ripped across that ridge. The tent, when they finally found it, was slashed open from the inside.
And all their warm clothes, their food, their only chance of survival.
Left behind, undisturbed, as if they vanished in an instant.
The scene that searchers discovered was a horrifying map of flight and failure. 2 bodies found under a cedar tree a mile away, with hands burned to the bone.
3 more frozen halfway up the slope just desperately trying to return to the camp.
And finally, 4 bodies recovered months later in a ravine with catastrophic internal injuries, crushed ribs, fractured skulls, wounds one investigator compared to a car crash, yet with no external lacerations.
None. And then there's the other detail. One woman was found missing her tongue and eyes.
And some of their clothing tested positive for trace levels of radiation.
The Soviet government, in a move that guaranteed decades of speculation, closed the investigation quickly. They called it merely a compelling natural force. The entire case was closed in 3 months and classified for decades. This is the Dyatlov Pass mystery.
Welcome to Whispers of Crime podcast show.
We're examining the records, the forensic reports, and the modern scientific models that try to explain this enduring tragedy. Subscribe to Whispers of Crime on YouTube and follow us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Spreaker, and all other podcast platforms.
So when we talk about the Dyatlov group, I think it's critical to start here.
Yeah.
We are not talking about reckless amateurs who got caught out by the weather.
No, absolutely not.
We need to begin by understanding their pedigree, because their expertise is, it's really the first piece of evidence that makes that panic flight so baffling.
It's the central paradox of the entire case. The story starts not with a random group of students, but with an elite expedition. The leader was Igor Dyatlov, just 23, a radio engineering student at the Ural Polytechnical Institute, UPI.
And he handpicked his team.
He did. A team of 9 others, mostly peers from the UPI engineers, physicists, mountaineers. I mean, these were highly specialized, highly trained young people at the top of their game.
So what was the ultimate goal? This wasn't just a weekend hike.
Not even close. Their goal was to earn the Grade 3rd certification, which was the highest level of hiking and mountaineering proficiency in the entire Soviet Union.
Highest level.
The highest. This wasn't a casual badge. It required a successful completion of a highly rigorous 300-kilometer traverse through deep wilderness and extreme cold. They were essentially training to be masters of survival in the brutal Russian winter.
So their route wasn't chosen by chance. It was chosen specifically for its difficulty.
Precisely. Their intended destination was Gora Otorten, which is roughly 10 kilometers north of where the incident eventually happened. The local route commission approved their chosen path as Category 3rd, estimating it as the most difficult for that time of year, February.
So that's a clear indication that they were equipped, both physically and mentally, for the worst the northern Urals could throw at them.
That's what they believed. They set out from Sverdlovsk, which is now Yekaterinburg, on January 23rd, 1959.
But the group started with 10, right? And only 9 made it to the mountain. One man's illness saved his life, and that fact, it just underscores the fragility of fate in this whole story.
That was Yuri Yudin. He was 21. Just a few days into the trek, on January 28, Yudin was forced to turn back. He suffered from just debilitating knee pain, sciatica, and he also had a known congenital heart defect.
Tough decision to make.
He gave his friends one of his prized possessions, a small container of sulfuric acid, which, it sounds odd, but he wanted them to use it for their photographic work. And he watched them disappear into the taiga. He was spared the terrible fate of his 9 companions, and that was a burden he carried for the rest of his life.
So 8 men and 2 women, Ludmila Dubinina and Zinaida Kolmogorova, they continued on. How do we know what happened in those days leading up to the disaster? We have records, don't we?
We do. We have their diaries, their journals, and their photographic plates, which allowed investigators to meticulously piece together the final 48 hours of their journey. On January 31st, they were high up in a wooded valley.
And they set up a base camp.
Standard practice. They established a Labaza camp base, or cache, where they stored surplus food, extra skis, and heavy equipment. This decision was crucial because it meant they were now traveling light. But it also meant that their main survival resources were kilometers away, back down the mountain.
So by February 1st, they were fully committed to this summit push with just minimal supplies, relying entirely on the gear they carried. What were the conditions like that day?
They started late, likely hampered by poor visibility. And then the weather turned brutal, slowing them dramatically. They were fighting snowstorms, high winds, visibility dropped to almost nothing.
And that's when they made the mistake.
Critically, yes. This caused them to deviate from their intended course. Instead of crossing the pass, they drifted west and began climbing the lower eastern slope of Kholat-Sakalded Mountain itself.
Dyatlov, as the leader, had to make a call around 5 p.m., just as the sun was beginning to set. He could have saved them by retreating.
He absolutely could have. At 5 p.m., he was faced with a critical choice. Descend 1.5 kilometers back to the forested area where they would have found shelter, firewood, relative safety, or set up camp where they were on the exposed, treacherous slope.
And he chose the slope.
Dyatlov chose the exposed slope.
That decision defies basic winter mountaineering logic. Why? I mean, why would he do that?
It's a point of intense speculation, and it's central to the tragedy. Yudin, the survivor, later speculated that Dyatlov just refused to lose the altitude they had gained. He felt pressure to stick to his Category 3rd schedule.
So, ambition.
Possibly. Or he may have wanted to demonstrate their capacity for camping on an exposed ridge, fitting the rigorous requirements of the certification. Whatever the reason, it was a decision driven by ambition or maybe a misplaced sense of security in their own abilities.
But the decision to camp there involved more than just pitching a tent, didn't it? They actually modified the environment around them.
Yes, and this is key. They had to dig a large, deep, sighted trench really into the snow to install their 9-person tent and secure it against the high winds.
Oh, I see where this is going.
This simple act of site modification, the carving of the snow, is now believed to have been the pivotal, unintentional trigger for the entire disaster. They weakened the base layer of the snowpack directly above where they slept.
So they set up, ate dinner sometime between 6 and 7 p.m. Their journals note that everything was difficult, but they were in good spirits. But the clock was ticking down.
Dinner happened, and based on the stomach contents analysis, the lack of deep digestion, the time of death for the entire group was estimated to be 6 to 8 hours after they finished eating.
Which puts the catastrophic event squarely in the quiet, dark hours of the early morning of February 2nd, probably between 1 a.m. and 3 a.m.
Exactly.
Okay, let's move to the discovery. After the group failed to report back by their expected date, they had a deadline, right?
They did. They'd agreed to contact the Institute when they reached the nearest settlement. When they didn't, search teams were eventually mobilized. But it took 3 weeks. 3 weeks until February 26th for them to find anything.
When the student who found the tent, Mikhail Sherevin, what he discovered was a scene that just it immediately broadcast absolute raw terror.
It did. The tent was half torn down, covered with heavy snow, but the state of the interior was what was so shocking. All of their major survival gear, their heavy felt boots, the valanche, their coats, their sleeping bags, all left behind.
As if they just evaporated.
The food preparation was interrupted. A side of salo-cured pork fat was partially cut on a plate. It was as if a timer had gone off and they simply vanished.
They fled naked into the most brutal conditions on Earth, leaving behind everything they needed. And the way they got out. That was perhaps the most telling initial clue.
It was. Investigators confirmed that the tent fabric had been sliced open in multiple places from the inside.
From the inside?
Using knives that were later found inside the tent. This wasn't an orderly exit through the main door. It was a desperate, immediate, forced egress. It indicates a sudden, non-negotiable crisis forced them to flee without wasting a single second fumbling with a zipper.
But if they were in a state of sudden, acute panic, why didn't they run for their lives? This part has always bothered me.
That's the central paradox. The search teams found 9 distinct sets of footprints leading 1.5 kilometers downhill toward the woods.
Footprints left by people wearing what?
Only socks, a single boot, or, horrifically, walking completely barefoot in negative 40-degree temperatures. And the prints suggested they were walking at a relatively normal pace, not running wildly.
You're telling me highly trained mountaineers, facing a threat so terrifying they abandoned all their gear, chose to walk a mile barefoot in the Arctic night.
That's what the evidence shows.
That contradicts every single survival instinct. It suggests some kind of profound neurological or cognitive breakdown.
It certainly does. If they had been attacked by humans, they would have scattered and run. If it were a gradual weather event, they would have dressed. The footprints, while they were eventually obscured by snow after about 500 meters, they imply not outright physical panic, but disorientation and confusion.
A state often called cold stupid.
Exactly. It sets in during the early stages of hypothermia and severely impairs judgment. They were operating under some terrifying internal logic that demanded immediate flight, but simultaneously disabled their ability to execute basic life-saving measures.
Let's follow those tracks then, to the first grim discovery in the woods near that Siberian pine tree.
About 1.5 kilometers down the slope, near the relative shelter of the forest line, searchers found the first two bodies, Georgy Krivonyshenko and Yuri Doroshenko.
And their state.
Shoeless, dressed in almost nothing, mostly just underwear and thermal layers. They were found near the visible, scorched remnants of a small, pathetic fire.
A fire they couldn't manage to sustain.
No, but the scene around the cedar tree showed immense effort and desperation. Branches on the pine tree were broken off up to 5 meters high.
5 meters? So someone climbed it.
Repeatedly. This was not small fallen kindling. Someone had scaled that tree, perhaps trying to get high enough to look back up the slope in the darkness, hoping to locate their camp, or chillingly, to identify what was chasing them.
And the signs on Krivonyshenko's body, they revealed the full horror of their final delusional state.
Yes, both men officially died of hypothermia, but Krivonyshenko's hands were badly burned, suggesting he was trying to tend the fire but had lost all sensation. But more disturbing was the finding that he had chewed or bitten off a chunk of his own knuckle, his own flesh.
My God.
This type of severe self-mutilation is a gruesome, documented sign of an extreme delusional state. It's often seen in terminal exposure cases. It speaks to a deep, agonizing confusion in their final moments.
So we have the first two bodies, utterly exposed, dying of cold, but the investigation then revealed that 3 other hikers tried to return to the only place they knew offered warmth.
Correct. Igor Dyatlov, Zenaida Kolmogorova, and Rustam Slobodin were found scattered on the slope, roughly 300 to 630 meters from the fire. They perished trying to climb back uphill to the abandoned tent.
They were better clothed.
Slightly, suggesting a brief moment of triage or recovery, but still woefully inadequately dressed for a negative 40-degree night.
They died trying to regain the ground they had so violently fled.
It's a tragedy within a tragedy. Dyatlov was found frozen, lying on his back, clutching a small branch. Kolmogorova was found further up, showing signs of having struggled hard. And Slobodin, while dying of hypothermia, notably had a small, non-fatal crack in his skull.
A crack in his skull.
An injury that was initially overlooked but would later prove to be a crucial data point. But for now, all 5 perished from the cold.
We have to pause here to address the absolute irrationality of their lack of clothing, which the forensic experts had to reconcile.
This brings us to a crucial concept: paradoxical undressing.
I've heard of this. It's when people who are freezing to death suddenly feel hot.
Exactly. The final stage of severe hypothermia is characterized by the failure of the body's vasoconstriction mechanism. The vessels that have been clamped down to keep warm blood in the core, they suddenly fail and relax.
So all that core warm blood rushes to the skin.
And victims experience an intense delusional sensation of burning warmth. In their already confused state, driven by cold stupid, they compulsively strip off their clothes, believing they are overheating. This explains, with terrifying clarity, why 5 highly experienced hikers ended up nearly naked in an Arctic blizzard. Their deaths were accelerated by a malfunction of their own survival biology.
So the first 5 bodies tell a consistent, if horrifying, story of panic, cognitive failure, and death by exposure. But the final 4 bodies, they introduced the elements that truly cemented this case as an enduring mystery.
Yes. The search continued for 2 more months. It wasn't until May 1959, when the massive spring thaw began, that the final 4 bodies were discovered.
Where were they?
They were located deep in a ravine about 75 meters further into the woods from the cedar tree, buried under 4 meters of packed snow, near what appeared to be a rudimentary snow den built into the creek bank.
Who were they and what condition were they in?
They were Lyudmila Dubinina, Semyon Zolotaryov, Nikolai Thibault-Brignol, and Alexander Kolevatov. The clothing on this group immediately indicated a period of triage and resourcefulness.
What do you mean?
Dubinina, for example, was found wearing Krivonyshenko's torn, burned trousers. Kolevatov was wearing parts of Dubinina's sweater. This shows that the 4 who made it to the ravine were functional long enough to strip clothes from the deceased victims on the slope and attempt to use them for warmth.
So they were surviving. But unlike the first 5, 3 of this final group did not die of simple hypothermia. They died of horrific, Massive trauma.
This is the moment the narrative pivots from tragic exposure to chilling mystery. Thibaut Brignolle had a massive, fatal skull fracture. Zolotaryov and Dubinina both suffered severe, massive chest fractures. Their rigs were crushed.
I want to focus on the severity of these injuries. What exactly did the forensic pathologist Boris Vozrozhdeny say about the force required to inflict this kind of damage?
Vozrozhdany's report is the cornerstone of the enigma. He testified that the force required to cause such damage was extremely high, comparable to that of a car crash.
A car crash.
Imagine the force of a vehicle moving at high speed impacting a person. That is the level of internal compression sustained by these three victims.
But the truly perplexing detail is the lack of external marks. If they were hit with something that shattered their ribs like that, you'd expect massive bruising, cuts, penetration wounds, something.
Exactly. The lack of external wounds associated with the bone fractures suggests they were subjected to immense non-penetrating compression or pressure, rather than a direct, sharp blow from an assailant or a fall onto jagged rocks. The trauma was internal, sudden, and devastating.
And the fourth person in that group?
Kulovatov, the fourth member, died of hypothermia. But his involvement with the severely injured strongly suggests they survived the initial trauma, and he attempted to care for his companions before succumbing to the cold himself.
And finally, we have to address the most sensational and gruesome finding, the missing soft tissue. This, more than anything, fueled the theories of a savage attack or military experimentation.
Dubinina was found missing her tongue, her eyes, and parts of her face and lips. Zolotaryov was also missing his eyeballs. This detail immediately sends a shiver down the spine and suggests intentional mutilation or a monstrous attack.
What was the definitive forensic explanation for these specific disturbing injuries? I mean, these are so often cited as evidence of foul play.
Vozrozhdeny made a crucial distinction. He judged these injuries to be post-mortem alterations.
Meaning they happened after she died.
Yes. Because these four bodies were found in May, after the snow had completely melted, they were lying in the bed of a small, non-freezing creek. Prolonged immersion in running water facilitates decomposition, and critically, small scavengers, rodents, small mammals, insects, they naturally target the most accessible, softest tissues.
The tongue, the eyes.
The tongue is easily accessible when a body is decomposing in water, and the eyes are simple targets for scavenging. These injuries were a terrifying consequence of the environment and the delay in discovery, not a deliberate act of violence during the crisis itself.
That makes the horror slightly more comprehensible, but the fact remains that 3 people had car crash-level injuries, and the Soviet government immediately shut the case down.
The official inquest in 1959 concluded that 6 died of hypothermia and 3 of fatal blunt force trauma. Investigator Vozrozhdeny definitively rejected the initial theory of an attack by the local Mansi people.
Why?
He argued the crushing force was too great and inconsistent with their weapons, and there were no defensive wounds or signs of a conventional assault.
So the evidence points away from human violence, yet towards an incomprehensible violent event.
Yes. And the case was closed on May 28, 1959, with the vague, now infamous conclusion that the deaths were caused by a compelling natural force which the participants were not able to overcome. The entire area was summarily closed to the public for 3 years.
That phrasing, a compelling natural force, coupled with the immediate classification of the files until the 1970s, it just instantly created the atmosphere of a government cover-up. Why did the Soviet bureaucracy react that way?
Well, in the Soviet era, any unexplained tragedy involving organized civilian groups often triggered swift classification to avoid public panic or, international embarrassment. The secrecy just solidified the public conviction that the government was hiding something far more sinister than a weather accident.
And we know the released documents were incomplete.
They were. Information about internal organs was allegedly missing. Some paperwork reportedly vanished.
And the rumors surrounding the KGB's involvement are highly specific.
They are. Accounts surfaced that the KGB secured the morgue and the hospital, placing personnel around the bodies and the reports. And furthermore, there were persistent rumors of excess quantities of alcohol being delivered to the morgue.
Why alcohol?
The speculation was that key personnel were pressured or coerced into altering records, or perhaps that evidence was just destroyed in a drunken haze. While it's impossible to verify, these anecdotes illustrate the level of public distrust fueled by the rapid closure and classification.
Okay, let's talk about the single physical anomaly that continues to haunt every discussion of this case.
Yeah.
The radiation.
This is often the first piece of evidence cited when military involvement is suggested. Some of the clothing, 4 sets of garments, specifically on the bodies, found in the ravine tested positive for beta radiation. It was described as some levels or slightly excessive.
In 1959, Soviet Russia, finding radiation on civilian clothes must have been explosive news.
It was, particularly because the Sverdlovsk region was known for industrial and nuclear activity, some of it catastrophic. Just 2 years prior, in 1957, the massive Kishtim disaster occurred. A nuclear waste storage tank exploded, contaminating a vast area of the Urals.
And there was a connection to the hikers.
There was. The fact that one of the hikers, Krivonashenko, had lived in a known contaminated zone and another may have been involved in cleanup operations, it instantly connected the radiation findings to known government failures.
So the public immediately concluded that the Dyatlov group was collateral damage from a secret Soviet nuclear test.
Oh.
But what did the scientific analysis actually reveal about that radiation?
This is the crucial distinction, often lost in the sensationalism. The radiation was found to be transient contamination, meaning it was external dust or particles resting on the fabric. It tended to wash off. It was not induced radiation resulting from a massive atomic blast. This strongly suggests industrial contamination picked up in the Sverdlovsk region before the trek, likely from their work or living environments, not from a military event on Dead Mountain.
So scientifically, it eliminates the nuclear incident as the cause of death.
It does. But politically, it was a massive red herring that ensured decades of distrust in the official account.
For decades, the Soviet government's classification only solidified the idea that they were hiding something sinister, a Yeti, a spy operation, or a bomb test. This lack of transparency drove people to seek answers in the most extreme places.
That's the legacy of the cover-up. The sheer impossibility of reconciling the evidence, the acute panic, the lack of clothing, the massive internal trauma, the lack of external tracks, it drove dozens of competing theories, both natural and man-made.
Okay, before we continue, a reminder to everyone listening. Don't forget to subscribe to Whispers of Crime on YouTube and follow us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Spreaker, and all major podcast platforms. Like, share, and comment on this episode. And please drop your review and rating.
So where do we start with the theories?
Let's first explore the natural theories that attempt to explain the panic, even if they can't fully explain the trauma. The infrasound panic theory is one of the most compelling psychological explanations.
It is, because it explains the irrational flight. This theory posits that high-speed katabatic winds, these are violent, dense, downslope winds typical in that specific region, funneling over the unique ridge of Kolatsiakol could have generated extremely powerful, low-frequency sound waves. Infrasound.
And that sound is below the level of human hearing, yet it physically affects the body.
Exactly. Infrasound waves are known to affect the nervous system profoundly. They can induce intense, primal terror, disorientation, nausea, vertigo, even visual hallucinations. Sometimes they cause the eyeballs to vibrate, leading to distorted peripheral vision.
Like seeing things in the corner of your eye that aren't there.
Precisely. And the specific shape of Dead Mountain, acting like an acoustic funnel, is crucial here. Modeling suggests it could amplify these low frequencies into a standing wave right over the tent site.
So the hikers are asleep. And suddenly, their internal organs are vibrating, generating this primal, overwhelming sense of fear, a non-negotiable threat that forces them to slash the tent and flee immediately, even if it meant walking into the dark naked.
It perfectly explains the acute, sudden nature of the panic and the subsequent cognitive failure. Now, while infrasound cannot cause a fatal skull fracture or crushed ribs, it provides the catalyst for the irrational actions that led to hypothermia and exposed the survivors to secondary dangers.
Okay, now let's look at the theories that focus on human foul play. The local Mansi people were the initial targets of the investigation.
They were. Dyatlov's group had been following a traditional Mansi trail, and they had collected mineral stones that some speculated could have been taken from a revered location. Investigators seriously considered the possibility that the hikers had desecrated a pagan holy site, perhaps a sanctuary known as a Turmkin.
What was the evidence against the Mansi people?
Ultimately, the evidence was non-existent. Investigators questioned and detained several Mansi people, including Stepan Kurikov and Grigory Kurikov, but the forensic report unequivocally ruled out human assault. The trauma was far too severe and internal for primitive weapons, and crucially, there were no tracks other than the 9 hikers in the deep snow around the tent.
So that theory was a dead end.
A dead end. The only disturbing footnote is the treatment of the Mansi who helped the search. They were later forced to beg for the meager payment they were initially promised for assisting the Soviet investigation.
So if it wasn't the locals, the narrative immediately shifted to the only other human presence capable of covering up such a massive trauma, the Soviet state, the covert military operation theory.
This is the theory that truly captivated the imagination during the Cold War. It suggests the campsite fell directly within the test path of a secret Soviet weapon. There are verified records of parachute mines being tested in the region at the time. These are devastating airburst weapons that detonate above the ground.
And how do airburst weapons relate to those car crash injuries?
Parachute mines or similar airburst ordnance create an intense, powerful pressure wave, a shock wave. This shock wave is capable of inflicting heavy, non-penetrating internal damage. Crushed ribs, ruptured organs, fractured skulls, all with minimal external signs of injury.
That precisely matches Vojrozhdeni's forensic observations.
It does. The victims could have been struck by a pressure wave while asleep or sheltered, leading to catastrophic internal trauma while the external skin remained intact.
And this military theory ties directly into the strange sightings reported in the sky around the time of the incident.
Exactly. We have reports from investigators, including eyewitnesses, and even one of the initial searchers, who reported seeing glowing orange orbs or fireballs floating or falling in the sky.
And the hikers photographed them.
These spheres were allegedly photographed by the hikers themselves on their final, underdeveloped film rolls. Proponents of the military theory argue that these were observation aircraft or descending parachute mines, and the government's reaction was simply to cover up a catastrophic training accident involving secret weapons.
The military theory is incredibly compelling because it explains the trauma and the secrecy simultaneously. But if it was a bomb, why weren't the bodies completely vaporized or scattered?
That's the key counterargument. A true large-scale blast would have caused massive destruction and deep radiation penetration, which the transient contamination finding contradicts. The theory requires a highly specific, localized pressure burst, perhaps a smaller charge or a unique propagation of the shock wave that focused its energy downward onto the tent without destroying the surrounding snowpack. It's a very specific scenario required for it to work.
We've covered the theories that haunted the Cold War imagination. We've seen that the crime scene defied easy explanation. The trauma suggested immense violence, but the context suggested chaos and exposure. In 2019, things started to change.
In 2019, the Russian Prosecutor General's office, under intense public pressure and utilizing modern forensic science, reopened the case. Their mission was clear: focus exclusively on natural phenomena, finally providing the resources for a modern scientific review, independent of all the conspiracy noise. In 2020, they announced that the official cause of death was a slab avalanche.
But the avalanche theory had always been the weakest argument. It was rejected by early investigators. The slope was too mild, the debris was missing, and the timing was completely wrong. How did the 2020 ruling overcome decades of skepticism?
That's where the cutting edge of glaciological physics comes into play. The historical arguments against the avalanche were solid. The average slope angle was only 23 degrees, generally considered too mild for a spontaneous slab avalanche, which usually require 30 degrees or more.
And no debris.
Right. Searching 26 days later, the massive avalanche debris that should have been there was completely absent. And most damningly, why the 9-hour delay between setting up camp and the disaster?
This required a completely new model of snow mechanics.
It did. The true breakthrough came in 2021 when physicists Johann Gaume and Alexander Puzrin from EPFL in Switzerland developed a sophisticated glaciological model. They provided the missing quantifiable mechanism showing how a very specific delayed slab avalanche could occur on that particular slope and cause the precise injuries observed.
Okay, let's break down the mechanics of their theory. What were the critical factors that made this rare type of avalanche possible despite the mild slope?
The model relies on a synergy of 3 rare overlapping factors. First, the topography and slope angle. While the average slope was mild, the ground beneath the snow was not flat. The underlying terrain had localized steeper sections up to 30 degrees, which increased the shear stress on the snowpack in that exact location where they pitched the tent.
So they just happened to pick the one spot on the entire slope that was fundamentally unstable beneath the surface.
Exactly. The second factor was the human trigger. By cutting that large level site into the snowpack to install their tent, the hikers severely compromised the structural integrity of the snow slab immediately above them. They effectively created a large, unsupported overhang.
And the third factor addresses the huge time delay, the 9 hours that puzzled everyone.
That was the delayed loading factor, driven by the weather Dyatlov was so keen to challenge. The exposed location meant that the intense, strong katabatic winds were continuously transporting and depositing heavy, rigid snow, a huge amount of mass, onto the already compromised slab above the tent.
So the wind was just piling more and more weight onto that weak spot they created.
Exactly. This wind-driven snow accumulation acted as the necessary additional load, gradually increasing the stress on the weak underlying snow layer. It wasn't an instant release. It was a slow-motion weight gain until the structure failed.
And the model could predict how long that would take.
Precisely. The Gauman-Puzrin model confirmed that based on the recorded wind speeds and snow density in the area, this accumulation process would have taken anywhere from 7.5 to 13.5 hours to generate enough internal stress to fracture the weak layer and release the slab.
And that timeline perfectly matches the forensic data.
It slots in perfectly. Setting up camp around 5 p.m., finishing dinner around 7 p.m., the impact window of 7.5 to 13.5 hours places the event right in the estimated time of death. 1 a.m. to 3 a.m. on February 2nd.
That answers the timing and the trigger. But how does a small, delayed slab avalanche generate car crash force without external damage? That's still the most difficult physical evidence to overcome.
This is the genius of the biomechanical simulation. The critical distinction is the mechanism of impact. The victims weren't swept away by a soft powder avalanche. They were lying inside the tent.
Right.
The model showed that even a small, dense slab, estimated at about half a cubic meter and very heavy, 400 kilograms per cubic meter density moving at a low velocity of about 2 meters per second, could inflict massive, non-penetrating blunt force trauma.
Why? Because the tent itself acted as a rigid structure.
The tent became the rigid base for the impact. The victims were instantly pinned between the dense, sliding snow slab above them and the rigid, hard tent floor, which was compacted snow reinforced by their skis, and poles lie out beneath the tent fabric.
So it's a compression injury.
The ultimate compression injury. Imagine a giant, dense foam mattress falling on you while you're lying on concrete. The force is distributed over a wide area, causing immense compression to the ribs and skull without tearing the skin or penetrating the tissue.
The tent was the anvil, and the dense snow slab was the hammer. This explains the crushed ribs and the skull fracture with remarkable precision. It resolves the biggest mystery of the forensic report.
It resolves the biggest mystery while simultaneously resolving the second historical counter-argument, the lack of debris. Because the slab was small and localized, subsequent high winds and fresh snowfall over the following 26 days would have easily and quickly covered the small scar left by the event, making it invisible to the search teams 3 weeks later.
So if we accept this scientific consensus, a rare, wind-loaded slab avalanche, we can finally connect all the pieces into a single, comprehensive, and devastatingly logical sequence of events.
We can trace 5 interconnected phases of the catastrophe that ultimately claimed 9 lives.
Let's walk through it. Phase 1, the impact.
In the early hours of February 2nd, the delayed slab avalanche strikes the tent. The impact is sudden, silent, and violent, crushing 3 hikers, Dubinina, Zolotoryov, and Thibaut Brignol, with severe but not immediately lethal trauma. The accompanying intense noise from the katabatic wind, possibly amplified into infrasound, wakes the remaining 6 hikers in a state of absolute sheer terror and confusion.
The terror is that they believe the entire mountainside is coming down on top of them.
Exactly. Which leads to phase 2, the flight. In a state of cognitive shock, and this is the crucial part, it's rational mountain procedure in panic to flee a tent during a snowslide, fearing a second, larger avalanche. They slash their way out, abandoning everything. In their disoriented, panic-induced state, exacerbated by the initial trauma and the cold, they fail to retrieve crucial gear. They flee 1.5 kilometers downhill toward the perceived safety of the tree line.
Okay, phase 3, triage and exposure.
The group, now near the cedar tree, splits. Krivonyshenko and Doroshenko, the least injured and most exposed, attempt to start a fire for survival. The cold rapidly sets in, leading to the delusional state of paradoxical undressing and the horrific self-mutilation by Krivonyshenko. They are the first to succumb to hypothermia.
But 3 others make a heroic, desperate attempt to save the group.
Yes. Dyatlov, Kolmogorova, and Slobodin, the marginally injured, make the agonizing decision to turn back. They attempt the high-risk maneuver of returning uphill to the exposed tent to retrieve warm layers or sleeping bags. They die of exposure along this trajectory, falling one by one, their bodies forming a desperate line pointing back towards the abandoned warmth.
And that leaves the 4 in the ravine, the trauma victims and their remaining companion. Phase 4, The Last Stand.
The remaining 4, including the 3 severe trauma victims, move deeper into the ravine for better shelter. They scavenge clothing from the dead on the slope in a final, logical act of triage. They build a rudimentary snow den. But the pre-existing massive blunt force injuries, the crushed chest and fractured skull combined with the extreme cold, proved too much. It's theorized, given the den was dug over a stream bed, that a subsequent collapse of the ice shelf or the snow roof exacerbated their existing injuries or sealed their fate by crushing them further. They perish in the ravine.
And the final piece of the puzzle, Phase 5, postmortem alteration, explains the lasting image of mutilation.
Yes. The 4 bodies in the ravine lie in running water for 3 months until the May thaw. Decomposition and scavenging by local microfauna rodents and small animals naturally result in the loss of accessible soft tissues like eyes and the tongue, creating the horrifying visual evidence that for decades erroneously pointed toward a violent human or monstrous attack.
It's an overwhelming, devastatingly complex natural accident that required a perfect, tragic alignment of human action and rare physics. The original Soviet conclusion of a compelling natural force was correct. They simply lack the glaciological and biomechanical precision to identify it as a wind-loaded slab avalanche scenario.
The irony is profound. Dyatlov's expertise led him to camp on the exposed slope to prove their mastery, and that very choice set the stage for disaster. The moment the avalanche hit, their mountain training took over, instructing them to flee the tent. That rational, immediate action, executed in a panicked state without gear, was the singular decision that sealed their fate against the unforgiving environment.
It is heartbreaking to realize that this highly skilled group of young people, their average age was in the early 20s, didn't succumb to a monster or a spy, but to a cascading failure of nature and circumstance. They survived the equivalent of a slow-motion car crash, only to be overcome by the extreme, inescapable cold in the desperate hours that followed. It is a true testament to the raw, indifferent power of the northern Urals.
And despite the scientific consensus on the avalanche, the story remains compelling because of the gaps, the missing paperwork, the KGB involvement, the sheer scale of the trauma. It leaves room for doubt.
And the radiation found on those clothes, while scientifically explained as industrial contamination, remains a powerful physical relic of the outside world, their world following them into the remote wilderness. It serves as a haunting reminder that even when you're facing down the pure, raw power of nature, sometimes the secrets and dangers of human industry are already woven into the fabric of the disaster.
For those interested in exploring this case further and supporting the memory of the hikers, there is the Dyatlov Foundation. This organization works to ensure the memory of the group is honored and continues research into the enduring elements of the mystery. You should check our show notes for links to resources and the Dyatlov Foundation if you wish to help honor their memory or share your own thoughts on this 65-year-old mystery.
Don't forget to subscribe to Whispers of Crime on YouTube and follow us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Spreaker, and all major podcast platforms. Like, share, and comment. Give us your positive review and rating.